listening to the Agent Survival Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Ruppel, and this is our Friday Five, where we either look at 5 headlines from the week that agents should know about, or we do a deep dive, highlighting 5 important aspects of one topic. Today's episode is the latter of the two, and it's actually been a little over a year since I talked about this particular subject. It's been a little while since I critically thought about it, but it's very important because it's the very first step in starting out in the industry, getting licensed to sell insurance. Couple of important things to mention here if you're super brand new to the industry and this podcast. I'm talking about the Life, Health, and Accident Insurance Licensing Exam for the state of Pennsylvania. Insurance licensing requirements vary from state to state, so you'll want to check out the rules in your state before you get started. To do that, you can either visit your State Department of Insurance website, or you can go to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners website. They link out to each state's DOI, and we'll be linking to that resource in our episode notes. Some background on what's required here in PA. The Life, Health, and Accident license required educational training to be completed prior to taking the exam. And then licensed agents must complete a certain amount of continuing education credits to keep their license current. CE credit courses, as we call them, are available from a variety of companies, and they come in at different price points depending on the content. Pre-licensing courses, like what I took, function as a self-navigated study guide for the official licensing exam. Most of these courses include outlines, practice quizzes, and tests. Courses with higher prices might include extras like practical application, training videos, and instructor support, to name a few examples. Now that we've got those basics out of the way, let's take a look back at what I highlighted last time around and whether or not that assessment still holds up. Let's get into number 1 on the list, research and planning. Before you sign up for anything, I recommend, as I mentioned earlier, researching the requirements in your state as well as the prep course options available to you. I had a conversation with our learning team here at Ritter to talk through the different license options as well as the pre-licensing study courses. Now, a lot of that information exists in our night school video training series. We will be linking to that in the notes. And certainly, if you have questions, we invite you to reach out because we would love to help answer some of those for you. We cannot give you answers to the test, but I think sometimes it just helps talking to someone who's been through it before. In addition to research, I also mentioned planning. If you're taking a pre-certification course, I'll use the Pennsylvania example of 24 credit hours. It will take longer than just 24 hours to complete that training. 24 hours is the amount of training you will be working through, but that doesn't account for taking notes or reviewing content. If I had to estimate the time I spent completing coursework and studying, it would probably come out closer to 48 hours, including the time I spent studying, taking practice tests, and reviewing that material. I happen to take copious amounts of notes, and I did create a document just for definitions. So your mileage may vary depending on your learning style. For me, I learn well by reading, listening to, or watching content, and then taking notes while I'm doing that, going back to paraphrase those notes or concepts, writing them all out by hand. It's a lengthy process. And regardless of what kind of content I'm interacting with, if it uses examples, a simulation, or demonstration, some way that I can apply it back to some form of knowledge that I'm already familiar with, it's more likely that that information will stick. And I'm sure for those of you listening, you probably also know how you learn best as well. I would suggest keeping that in mind as you're going through the initial planning phase. Make sure you allocate the proper amount of time to learn the content in the style you prefer, the one that will help you retain the most information. And think about timeframes too. Make sure that you don't have too many interruptions to your planned schedule. This is not content that you want to cram for and then take the test. It's a lot of information, and the more time you give yourself to absorb that information, the better you're going to do on your exam. Research and planning. I would say both of those still stand up, and that's probably where I would still begin my list of advice. There's a set amount of time to access the learning modules, and I would not recommend wasting a minute of it. I especially liked that the version I took built out a timetable I needed to follow to stay on track. That was very helpful because I did have a weekend or two where I had plans and I couldn't study. But it's a lot of material. It's a time commitment. Do what you can to set yourself up for success. Let's move on to number 2 on the list. It's okay if you hit a wall in your studying. I think I was about halfway through the life insurance section when I started thinking, why am I doing this? You might get to a point where you feel a little bit overwhelmed by studying. If you get to that point, take a break. That's why we don't suggest going through the pre-certification course in a time frame as short as a week or even a weekend. Give yourself time to work through the material at a sustainable pace and really absorb the information. Also, don't lose sight of why you want to get your license in the first place. Whether it's a completely new career path or a new line of business for your portfolio, keep that motivation top of mind. I'm glad that I mentioned this in the initial episode so I could come back to it here. I know I have a tendency to look back on memories more fondly over time. This keeps a little reality check in the mix. You will probably hit a wall with studying at some point, or you'll get to a point where you are doubting your life choices. And I think that comes with anything that's new and challenging. What's important is having a clear idea of what is motivating you to not just pass the exam, but become a licensed insurance agent. For me, it was a learning experience. My motivation, probably different than yours, and that's okay. What's important here is to keep that goal, your why, in mind. When you hit a wall, the strength of your why will help get you through. Number 3. Piggybacking on the idea of hitting a wall. The good thing about that is there's usually a way to think around it and keep going. Find your groove. Find what works for you. After I hit my wall, I switched up the way I was taking notes. I started out taking notes as I was reading through the material. And after I hit the wall, I switched to reading through the content first, sometimes even reading it aloud, and then taking any necessary notes after I had read through each concept. Just that small little switch helped me to remember a lot more of what I was reading as my attention was solely focused on that. At the time that I was going through the pre-licensing training, I had gone digital with a lot of my note-taking. And to be honest, it had been a little while since I had to study for that length of time and with that much intensity. So I had to switch up my method as I went along. One of the things I learned about myself during the whole process is that I still learn best by taking notes with pen and paper. Makes sense. It is a slower process than typing, so the information has more time to stick. By the time I got to the practice quizzes and was really trying to get those last little bits of information to stick, I was writing notes and definitions out by hand. Now, obviously, licensing is a learning experience, but I was not expecting to come away from it having learned a little bit more about myself. But I did. I'm still taking digital notes, but I've started mixing pen and paper back in, especially when I'm learning new content or trying to stay ultra focused. Number 4, let's talk flashcards, because as much as I normally like flashcards, the ones included in my coursework were not always helpful. So here's the thing. The flashcards were an included option that in my research and planning phase, I thought seemed like a good thing to be included. If I had to rate them, I would put them at about half effective, half not. And here's why. For the flashcards that presented a single term with a single definition, those were great. They worked very well. But there were definitions that could have been further broken down. Sometimes definitions were lumped together as versus definitions, where it was important to know the difference between the two terms. Sometimes they required more than one term, like an insurable risk or the elements of a contract. For me, I think these cards would have been much more beneficial if they were laid out as one term with one definition. Now, I know this is small potatoes, as we like to say here at Ritter, but for me, it is significant potatoes. Now, I'm very well aware I could have created my own set of flashcards with definitions broken out in the manner I just described, but that would have taken a lot of time to create from scratch. So for an included resource that I thought I would use a lot, I didn't find it as helpful as I initially thought, and I didn't use it that often. But again, your mileage may vary. Yep, I think this one still stands as well, and I can't say that I can add anything more insightful, so let's move on to the next one. Moving on to number 5, what helped me the most, and that was taking practice tests. A lot of them. My course included quizzes as I went through each lesson and then concluded with a practice exam. Prior to taking that practice exam, I was able to take simulated practice exams, which I called practice exams. Thankfully, there were no limits to the amount of these simulated practice exams. I was able to create and take as many as I liked. In the weekend leading up to my exam, that was all I did. I continually took those practice exams. And full disclosure, I failed the first one. But after that happened, here's what I did next. I reviewed my incorrect answers and wrote them all out by hand in a notebook. I also wrote down a list of definitions to review for some of the concepts that I was struggling with. Some of those definitions were surrender charge, the right to examine provisions, riders in general, the elimination period, and so on. After I reviewed the incorrect answers, I took a little break. Then I came back and took another practice exam. Each time I went through this test, review, correct, and write out definitions process, my score got a little bit higher. When I got to the point that I felt confident in my knowledge, I was able to take the actual practice exam to finish out my pre-certification course and pass that on the first try. I do wish that I had started taking the practice exams a little bit sooner because that really helped to ingrain some of the more confusing concepts like tax laws and the way they differ depending on product and if it's money going into an account or being paid out to a beneficiary and when. I cannot recommend taking those practice exams enough. I still wish I would have started taking the practice quizzes sooner. I think I would have gotten more acclimated to the test-taking style and the verbiage a little bit sooner, and it would have helped me retain more along the way. If I could go back, I would either end each week or start each week by taking cumulative practice quizzes to test out what I'd just learned, but also to keep cycling those early modules back into my brain. And one final, bonus thought for the day. The questions are multiple choice. Some of them are worded in ways to absolutely trip you up. That is the way multiple choice exams work. So make sure you're taking the time to read the question and every answer at least twice. There were quite a few double negatives that tripped me up. We will be linking to a document with strategies to keep in mind while you're taking a multiple choice exam. There are some great tips on there to keep tucked into the back of your mind, of course, in addition to a good amount of studying and really knowing the content. The insurance licensing exam covers a lot of content. It does a really good job of laying the foundation of learning, but I think that continuing education is also so important. And I think that's true whether it's actual CE credits that count toward keeping your licensing current or just keeping up on industry news. The more you get into the content and how it affects you as the agent, your clients, hospitals, physicians, the more you'll understand. But it does take a certain level of curiosity and wanting to learn to do that. There is a reason that quote about leading a horse to water is so popular. It's easy to do that, right? But having the curiosity that drives you to understand how something works, or how one type of insurance works in the grander scheme of the whole industry, that's something you have to want to seek out yourself. I'm naturally a curious person, and my curiosity stems from wanting to understand. And then I like to pass on my experiences so others who are also curious can have a better understanding of what to expect before you sign up to get licensed. But if you still have questions about the licensing process, I definitely understand. We would love to hear from you. Maybe you'd like to share your own licensing story with us. We would love to hear from you too. Reach out by emailing asgpodcast@ritterim.com. That's asgpodcast@ritterim.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Feel free to pass this episode along to potential downline agents prepping for the licensing exam, or even just thinking about it. We are here to help agents survive and thrive in this industry. And the licensing exam, again, is where it all starts. I hope you have a great weekend. Stay healthy and stay safe out there. Next week, we'll be back with a regular Friday 5 episode. So until then, follow along with us, and we will see you next week. The Agent Survival Guide podcast is a production of Ritter Insurance Marketing, an integrity company. This episode was written and produced by me, Sarah Ruppel. Script editing and fact check by Tina Lamoureux. Podcast design by Urban Rivera. Follow along with our show wherever you like to listen.